Welcome to the First Hebrew Primer, chapter 27. One great thing with this chapter is there is not quite as much vocabulary as we normally have. So as you take a look at this in the upper right, there's the word et, which as you know looks like the definite direct object marker. But it's also, there's a different word et that looks identical in this form that is a preposition with. And then there's the verb asaf, which means to gather in the cow stem, cow pattern. Haya, which means to be or become or sometimes live in the cow pattern. Yasaf in the hifil means to continue or add. Yara means to fear or be in awe of in the cow stem. And let me just say that in many conjugations, yara looks a lot like the verb ra'ah, to see. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as we move forward. There is the verb karat, which means to cut in the cow stem and to destroy in the hifil stem. And then the verb nasa, which means to lift or carry. In the upper left, we have the verb ala, which means to go up or ascend in the cow. It means to cause to go up or to raise in the hifil stem. Now there are a couple of idioms here. One really common one is karat barit, the verb to cut. Karat, with the noun barit, covenant, means to cut a covenant. Literally is how you would translate that. But that's an idiom that means to make a covenant. And the idiom to cut a covenant comes from the covenant ceremony that traditionally was about splitting animals in half, was a part of that covenant ceremony. And so the verb to make a covenant was karat barit, to cut a covenant. It's probably best to translate that to make a covenant in English, so that it's not confusing for the reader. But that's an embedded kind of historical, cultural background in the language there. And then finally, to lift the eyes, nasa einayim, to lift the eyes is an idiom for to look up. Very often that's translated literally though, especially in the more formal translations like an ESV or an NASB will say to lift one's eyes, following the King James. More modern dynamic translations are going to smooth that out, to just look up, which is a more normal way of speaking in English. Okay, one of the main things with this lesson is basically what's on this slide. There's two ways that you can say the sentence, he will keep us, in Hebrew. If you look at the top one, you already know this. Yishmor otanu. That's the verb he will keep, with a definite direct object marker with an attached pronoun suffix. He will keep us. There's another way of communicating that same thought, and that is to drop the definite direct object marker and attach the pronoun directly to the verb. So this is yishmerenu. That one word in Hebrew is an entire sentence in English. He will keep us. So the he will keep is the yishmar part. Yishmar, or yishmor, the holum has reduced there. That's he will keep. And then the enu is a pronoun suffix. Just like you can add a pronoun suffix to a noun or a preposition, you can also add it to a verb. And it functions as the object of the verb. And that's what we have here. And that's basically the main thing for this lesson, is just understanding that. Now the good news is, you already pretty much know these suffixes. If you've memorized the Lamed poem, lo, la, laka, lakli, lahim, lahin, lachem, lachen, lanu, those endings are pretty much the same or very similar to what we have on verbs. So you have the holum, that's the lo, the la, laka, lakli, you can see this here, those are the same. So in many forms of the verb, it's going to use those same endings. There are, however, some alternate endings. These are used particularly in verbs that end in a vowel, which many forms of a verb will end in a vowel. That changes some differences to the pronominal suffix. So there's an alternate 3ms suffix, which is who, which looks a lot like the independent pronoun. In the 3fs, you can switch the a and the hey, the a vowel and the hey. Instead of it's ha. In the 1cs, you can have a noon before the e ending, so ni. Or in the 3MP, 3FP, sometimes it drops the hey before the final mem or noon. Here's just an example of the verb he killed, katal, in the Cal pattern. Perfect, Cal 3MS perfect, katal, with every pronoun attached to the end. So the top, this is he killed him, katalo. He killed her, katala. He killed you, katalcha. So you can just see that all the way through, and see how that works. You still have he killed. It's the same verb in every form, same conjugation, with a different pronoun suffix attached at the end. Now, in the imperfect, many suffixes take an additional noon, these heavy noon suffixes. And that's just part of the language. It's like linguistically it helps the speaker, get to the suffix after the verb. So like in the third feminine singular, instead of a comets hey or a hey comets, you might get noon comets hey. And even there's a doubling dagesh in the noon. So this is yilkadena, and that would be he will capture her. Or the 2ms, instead of cha, you'll get ka with a doubling dagesh in there. That's an assimilated noon hiding there. That's yikadecha. He will capture you. Or instead of, now this is probably the one to note the most. This is the most different. Instead of a holum or a hu, sometimes in the imperfect you get an anu. The segol noon shurik is a 3ms suffix. So this is yil kadenu, he will capture him. So that's maybe another suffix to add to your vocabulary there. All right, so let's take a look at, here's the verb they will guard. This is in the imperfect, yishmaru, they will guard. And you can see all the different suffixes attached to the end as we go through it. So let me just read through this in the imperfect. Yishmaruni, that's they will guard me. Yishmarucha, they will guard you. Yishmaruch, they will guard you, feminine singular. Yishmaruhu, they will guard him. Yishmaruha, they will guard her. Yishmarunu, they will guard us. Yishmaruchem, they will guard y'all. And Yishmaru marum, they will guard them. That's with the imperfect. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see the perfect form, shamaru, they guarded, and then you can see all the different pronoun suffixes attached to that. So it's very similar. You're just attaching that pronoun suffix onto the end of the verb. So that's the main thing for this week. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about is a difficulty in distinguishing between the cow pattern and the hifil pattern with some roots, particularly roots that are first guttural, third hay roots. So think about, and there's actually a number of these. Some of these are very common words, like asa, to lift or carry, or to do or make, rather, or Allah, which means to go up or ascend. So think of what the gutturals are. You have ayin, aleph, hey, chet, and sometimes resh, kind of acts as a semi-guttural. When you have that as the first root letter of a consonant and a hey as the third root letter of a consonant, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the pa'al or the cow pattern and the hifil pattern. It's especially difficult in the imperfect conjugation. In fact, in the imperfect, if you look down both these paradigms, you have the cal or the pa'al on the right-hand side here and the hifil on the left. As you look down, they're identical in all of these forms. The hifil and the cal look identical. So the only way to really tell the difference between those two forms is context. Is it more of a causative idea, to cause to go up, or is it more of a simple action idea, to go up? And again, in these particular forms, you're going to have to rely on context. In the perfect, it's a lot easier to see the difference because even though the endings look similar, you have that hey prefix in every form of the hifil perfect, where you don't have that on the cal perfect. And in fact, you have that long a vowel under the first root consonant. So it is easier to distinguish in the perfect. In the imperfect, again, in many cases, they are identical. Here's the command or the imperative form. in the upper left here, you can tell the difference between the kal or the pal and the hifil because of that hey prefix. So you take a look at that paradigm there. And then in the participle form, you can also tell a difference because of the main prefix in the hifil, main with the a vowel, the ma, whereas the kal or the pal pattern does not have a prefix at all. Same thing with the regular infinitive and the infinitive of emphasis. So it's really in the imperfect that you have the challenge of being able to distinguish between those two. And then one last thing for this week. We talked about the direct object marker, which you already know, et, but there's also, in our vocab this week, a preposition that looks the same in the lexical or the vocabulary form, et. However, these are different words, and one of the ways you can tell they're different is when you put a pronoun suffix on them. So just like any other preposition, you can put a pronoun suffix on this word, and when it's the preposition with, you put the pronoun suffix on the end, and you'll see how you get an I-class vowel under the aleph. So you have iti, itecha, itach, ito, ita. So all the way through that, you can see that I vowel followed by a doubling dagesh in the tav, and then the suffix. If it's the direct object marker, the et, the segol vowel, will change to a holum, to an O sound, when you put a pronoun suffix on the end. So when you have a pronoun suffix, you can definitely tell the difference between these two words. When it's a definite direct object marker, you just translate the pronoun as the object. So here oti would be me, otecha would be you, and so on all the way through this. But again, the main thing to look at is the vowel following the aleph. If it's an I, it's the preposition with. If it's an O, it's a direct object marker.